What's up, everybody? This is Christoforou with the Duran, and I'm here with Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. And today we're going to be taking a look at John Bolton's plan to place 5,000 U.S. troops on the border of Venezuela. All right, Alexander. John Bolton left a meeting. He had scribbled on a notepad for everybody to see, interestingly enough. He had some stuff to say about Afghanistan, and then he had some stuff to say about Venezuela and a certain amount of troops in Colombia ready to possibly invade. Everyone was jumping to conclusions as to what was going on. Was this really, part of the plan? Were these real talking points, or is John Bolton trolling people? What do you make of this incident that took place?
Right, John Bolton, in my opinion, was definitely trolling people. I'll tell you why I think that. First of all, he comes out of this meeting. He has this notepad there. He has it open so that everybody can see it and photograph it. And he has exactly scribbled these words so that everybody can see them, and they can be photographed, and they can be in the media all over the place.
As they were.
I mean, exactly. It was a transparent device. I mean, it was clearly done to troll Maduro and the Venezuelan military, and I think to put the frighteners on them and to say to them, oh my God, the United States is on the way, and they're going to invade Venezuela, and we better all change sides quickly, because if we don't, we could be facing a military crisis with the US very soon. I say all of that. I would add that the Colombians, who are supposed to be hosting these troops, I'll say that they know absolutely nothing about this, and I am sure that there is no such plan at the moment. There are other plans which are much more dangerous, and I think the person we should be focusing on a lot is Elliott Abrams, who's now been appointed to coordinate this thing. And of course, he is an expert, if that's the right word, in these so-called dirty wars that have been fought in Latin America and in other places. And I predict that the next step will be to try and arm rebels in Venezuela against the Venezuelan government and try to overthrow it that way if all these economic sanctions don't succeed. But I think Bolton's little game was just a bit too transparent, I think, to really be very credible. And I think he's a flamboyant sort of guy. You only have to look at his whiskers and his haircut, and he loves to put on a show, and I think that's what he was doing.
Yeah, the fact that Elliott Abrams is working with Mike Pompeo on Venezuela is extremely scary. Elliott Abrams, as you rightly said, is a master of chaos, a master of destruction in South America and Latin America, going back to Iran-Contra. So he has experience. He's done this before, that's for sure.
Exactly.
From what I understand in my readings, Alexander, what it's coming down to right now is who's going to be able to control the military going forward.
Yes.
And that'll decide, I guess, who's going to control the country. Is that a proper assessment?
That's exactly right, and that's what I think. That's what Maduro, that's what Bolton was up to. I mean, as I said, by spooking, as he thought, the Venezuelan military with this idea that there's an American army on the way to Colombia. I should add 5,000 men, 5,000 U.S. troops is nowhere near enough to invade and occupy Venezuela. It's a big country, 30 million people. 5,000 men isn't going to conquer it. I mean, it might act as a tripwire in Colombia, but of course, I mean, even that's been denied. I mean, it was just a silly trick. It was trolling, as you correctly said. But it is the military in Venezuela that, of course, controls the situation there. And the interesting thing about Venezuela is that apparently there's plans for anti-Maduro protests tomorrow, Wednesday, But actually, if you look at the situation in the country over the last couple of days, since Guaido, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce his name, by the way, Guaido declared himself president, it's actually been pretty quiet. There's not been big protests. The situation seems to be pretty much with Maduro in control, and with the army, the military, swearing loyalty to him, and with Maduro being filmed meeting military people. And I should add, by the way, that the Venezuelan military may not be the best in the world. In fact, it isn't. I mean, it's far away from being so. But it's actually got some pretty modern weaponry which it could use. So, I think if it sticks by Maduro, which it looks like it's doing for the moment, I think he's safe, at least for a time.
So would you say that the more this drags on, the more the U.S. can't remove Maduro quickly, so the more time that this thing's allotted, would it be safe to say that Maduro will be able to hold on to his position for the time being, and we start to move towards Elliott Abrams, i.e. Plan B, which will be an Iran-Contra insurgency, Syria, rebels? We know the playbook. All our viewers know the playbook. Yeah.
Exactly. I think that's exactly what's going to happen. I think at the moment, as I say, people like Bolton with his 5,000 men to Colombia, that's basically trying to provoke the military in Venezuela to launch a coup against Maduro. If that doesn't work, and it looks like in a week or two's time that Maduro is going to ride this out, then I think the planning to start an insurgency against Maduro in Venezuela is going to start in earnest, because now the prestige of the United States is committed to his overthrow. And I don't see how the United States can pull back without suffering humiliation. And I don't think that's something the United States is prepared to accept. So I'm afraid we're looking at the very real possibility of an insurgency, a foreign-backed, US-backed insurgency using the territories of Colombia and Brazil, intended to overthrow the government of Venezuela. I'm going to state where I think a problem with that strategy may come. If you take your mind back to the insurgencies that were launched by the US against the government of Nicaragua in the 1980s, the revolutionary government that took power there. The point was, those insurgencies were based on the army of the former Somoza government that had ruled Nicaragua before the Sandinista revolutionary government that the United States was seeking to overthrow had taken power. Now that meant, because it was based on a former army, those guys, those people, those Contras, knew how to fight. They were trained soldiers. They were trained military. If the military in Venezuela stands loyal to Maduro, there aren't people. There isn't that sort of block of trained fighters who can launch an insurgency right away. And most of the people who have been protesting against Maduro so far appear to be mainly middle-class people who are not the sort of people who one automatically assumes make good guerrillas or insurgents. So there may be some problems finding human material to base this insurgency around. But Elliott Abrams is an expert, if that's the right word, and very experienced in this sort of thing. And no doubt he'll be working very hard, and he'll have all the might of the CIA and the US deep state, which is supportive of this project, behind him.
excellent point, Alexander. There's no ISIS jihadists lying around in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey that the U.S. can arm and train and then send into the country like they did with Syria. So I think that, yeah, that's a great point. That's a big stumbling block.
It is a stumbling block. I mean, it's going to take more time. I mean, so we'll just have to see how they're going to do it. I mean, they're going to try to do it, but it may take longer, a lot longer than people expect, because, as I said, the material to do it isn't in Venezuela at the moment. But you know, these people will try, and as I said, they've got long experience in doing this sort of thing.
And in the meantime, they're going to just beat down Venezuela with more and more sanctions, I imagine. Exactly. And does it not concern you, Alexander, that Trump's foreign policy team has, for the most part, shifted from, you know, they had that generals aspect, the Mattis and these guys, it was run by generals, and now to me it just seems that it's run by neocons.
Well, that's right. I mean, this is an extraordinary situation because just a few weeks ago, Donald Trump announces a withdrawal from Syria, which looks like an act of non-interventionism. It looks like Trump finally asserting himself. And just a few weeks later, we now see an open and straightforward regime change project launched against Venezuela. And it does again beg the question of who is really in charge in Washington. And one wonders how it's happened and how it's happened so quickly. I mean, clearly Trump dislikes Maduro, and he said terrible things about Maduro and about the government of Venezuela. I mean, he doesn't like socialists. He's made that very clear. But then, you know, he's also talked about Bashar al-Assad as a butcher, and he said terrible things about Assad also. But apparently those terrible things about Assad are not enough for Donald Trump to keep U.S. military involved in a war in Syria. But he's now prepared to go along with what looks like a war in Venezuela. It's very difficult to see much coherence here. And it's very worrying indeed, because yet again we see Bolton, because let's be very clear, it's Bolton, Pompeo, these people once again running the show.
Can you connect the dots a little bit and perhaps say that while a lot of the American public was and is against, you know, U.S. intervention in the Middle East, maybe the Trump team and his neocon team, especially in his foreign policy side of things, may be looking at some sort of Monroe Doctrine type of reasserting the Monroe Doctrine in the U.S.'s hemisphere as they head into 2020, saying, you know, kind of saying, I'll say it in very simplistic terms, you know, hey guys, this is a regime change that we could probably make happen and still, you know, come out ahead in the elections in 2020.
I think that's right. I mean, there's a lot to say here because, of course, I mean, the United States has historically regarded Latin America as its sphere of influence. I mean, and you can see a possible argument that the United States, as it pulls back from commitments around the world, which is what Trump says he wants to do, tightens its grip on that part of the world, which is Latin America, where it has historically been dominant, and which it says to itself, well, you know, we're prepared to pull back from places like Syria and Iraq, where we're not really very interested, but we're not prepared to pull back in the Americas, which are our backyard, and we're going to hold on to that, and there may be a critical mass of support for this policy within the United States itself. That, you know, it may be that there are enough people in the US who care about Latin America to make this effective there, precisely because Latin America is the US backyard. There is, of course, the other thing, which is, of course, that Venezuela is a very rich country. I mean, an economic crisis it may have, but it does have the world's largest proven oil reserves. It's got lots of other minerals too. The US may be saying to itself, if it's pulling out from the Middle East, it might be losing control, ultimately, of Middle East oil. It's seeing the Saudis and the Russians working increasingly closely together to control the oil market. Iran is involved in it also. So let us at least take control of Venezuela, which is extremely important for us, for its oil, and which, incidentally, a fact that is little known, played an absolutely critical role in supplying oil to the United States and to the Allied militaries during the Second World War. So, I mean, there's that long history, that sort of Monroe Doctrine attitude that, you know, this is our backyard and this is a major economic treasure house, an oil and energy and raw materials treasure house in the Americas, which we're just not prepared to give up.
And I also think that Venezuela also has a small maybe part to play, or maybe even a large part to play in Trump's initiative to build the wall as well. A little chaos, a little uncertainty in the region, people fleeing perhaps Venezuela to go Colombia, Brazil, and maybe even making their way up through Mexico. God knows how, but all of that can play into the wall narrative as well. So.
It could very well do, because, of course, bear in mind, if there's a crisis in Venezuela, if there is a war there, because Venezuela is a big country, it will have repercussions right across the region. I mean, Venezuela is already a very violent place. There's lots of crime there. There's drugs laws. There's all that kind of thing. And it is very easy to see how, if there's a civil war in Venezuela, there'll be millions of people moving. That will create more violence in other places, especially in the very weak countries of Central America. Colombia, of course, is not entirely stable either. That could start big migration flows towards the United States, and that might indeed have the effect, exactly as you say, of increasing pressure to build this wall, which, of course, Donald Trump is so committed to.
Yeah, it's a big part of his 2020 re-election campaign hinges on that wall, I would say.
Well, indeed. Well, indeed. Well, indeed.
Do you think if Maduro sticks it out, do you think the countries that the Brazils and the Colombias that were so against him and actually sided with the United States on this coup attempt, do you think they'll start to walk back as well?
Well, it depends how stable some of these countries are. I think Colombia is probably prepared to see this thing through, in that the political class in Colombia, which has governed Colombia for decades and which, in spite of the long wars and the political crisis there, looks as if it's firmly in control. I think they're very antagonistic to the Maduro government, as they were to Chavez previously, and I think they will continue to back the US in this project. Brazil is a completely different question, because, of course, it recently had a left-wing government, Dilma Rousseff, and despite the Bolsonaro election victory, I suspect there's still quite a lot of residual support within Brazil for Lula, who remained the most popular politician through the recent elections. He just wasn't allowed to stand in them. So Brazil might be a different thing, and it's a much bigger and much more complicated country than Colombia. So I think that in Brazil, it might not be possible there to sustain a long war against Venezuela if it comes to that. I suspect that there would be growing opposition in Brazil to this, and we could see the mood shifting, especially if the violence in Venezuela then starts to spill over to Brazil and causes violence there, bearing in mind that one of the major reasons why Bolsonaro won the election was that he said that he would end the violence in Brazil.
All right, so I guess everyone should be looking at Elliott Abrams. I think that's the big takeaway from what's going on.
Absolutely. He is the key figure. I'm not saying that Bolton is not important. I'm not saying that Pompeo is not important. Bolton is always someone you need to watch. I mean, because, let's be straightforward about this. Bolton is an extraordinary person. He's, he has a sort of flamboyance and a kind of directness, well, not directness, an openness about what he's doing, which is really remarkable. I mean, he's somebody who really does believe that the United States has the job of throwing his weight about. And I mean, he's clearly driving this. So Bolton is certainly the man to watch. But Elliott Abrams and the people around him are going to be the point people who are going to be orchestrating this thing. And it is they that we need to be very careful of and watching very closely. And of course, all the people, you know, the CIA, all that crowd who are always involved in these activities. The one thing I would say about it is that they're going to have their hands full with Venezuela. So maybe they'll be able to cause less trouble in other places like the Middle East.
I wouldn't bet on it. These guys are a sinister bunch, that's for sure. And if anyone should be, you know, looking out for these guys, it should be Trump, because he's surrounded by some real evil forces.
Well, indeed. Absolutely. Absolutely right.
All right, Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran. Thank you very much, guys. If you like this video, click on the subscribe button down below and click on that notifications bell to get notifications every time we push out a new video. Visit the Duran shop, buy a t-shirt, help support the Duran, and in the description box down below, you will find links to our PayPal and Patreon pages. Donate to the Duran, that helps us out a lot. And you can also get a copy of this show in audio format on iTunes and Soundcloud as well. And go to theduran.com to see all the articles that Alexander is reading every day and linking up to. Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran. Thank you very much. Until next time, guys, take care.